Welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, everyone. It is March the 11th, day number 70, and we begin a brand new book today, a book that you haven't read yet. So that's a positive thing, which means we're finished with Leviticus and Numbers.
Making progress.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we're in Deuteronomy, and we're going to look at chapter 1 of the book of Deuteronomy. Now, one of the things you'll see, and you'll see this actually as you read on in a few months, you're going to get like Chronicles and Kings together because they're going to tell the same story. So some of the things you're going to get here is information that you've already received or read. There may be some new details, but we're going to try to look at it in a completely, or in a new, fresh way maybe. It says, "These are the words that Moses spoke to all the people of Israel while they were in the wilderness east of the Jordan River. They were camped in the Jordan Valley near Suf, between Paran on one side and Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Dizahab on the other. Normally it takes only 11 days to travel from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, going by the way of Mount Seir. But 40 years after the Israelites left Egypt, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses addressed the people of Israel, telling them everything the Lord had commanded him to say." So to give you some context here, the journey should have taken 11 days. It has taken 40 years. And they're still not there yet because Moses is still talking to them, because Moses isn't going to make the journey into the promised land with them. This is pretty close to the end of his time. And Moses, in his last days, that's how I would describe it, says, okay, let me remind you of where you've been, what you've done, how this has played out. It's almost like a review. Before y'all move on, I want to review where you've been. What is the value of reviewing where you've been, what you've done, what's happened?
There's a lot of value in it on every level. I think it's important that families review sometimes, where they've been. If you remember where you've been, it helps you to recognize the progress you've made or deficiencies that you may still have. We do it as a church and as a staff. We do it periodically as we review what's happened and taken place previously. On a personal level, it's important that we review and think back to the past. I think there's a greater appreciation for the present when we remember where we've come from. There's some value in that.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about reviewing and looking back is seeing how God has worked in your life. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Moses is telling them about all this, is look and see how God worked through everything. Because when you're in the moment, experiencing everything, I mean, people were tired, they were hungry, and they were upset about being in the desert for so long. But when you look back and see how God had provided for them all that time, it's pretty incredible. It's one of the reasons why we're doing journaling right now as a church, because when you look back at that and you see that journaling, I mean, it's helpful in the moment when you're writing it because it helps you remember things. But when you look back and see all that you've been through, see all the questions that you've asked then, or even looking back and seeing prayer requests you had years ago, looking back and seeing those and seeing how God answered those or how God didn't answer those, but that in a good way many times. It's really amazing to look back and see. I mean, recently I was looking back at a journal I made when I was like 4. And it's hilarious to see, like, on one page it says, I got a pet snake, and then 2 pages later, my snake died. It's just funny to see all these different things and look back, but it's fun, and I think it's, besides just like being fun, there's a lot you can grow through being able to look back and see how God has moved through our lives.
Yeah. So on an annual basis, that's something I regularly do. I don't have a set way of doing it for longer periods, other than maybe to go back and read something in a journal. I know one of the things I have when I've read back through journals is seeing how I've personally grown. Mm-hmm. John Maxwell has one of the books that he wrote made the most impact on me was the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. That's his most famous book. I don't know how many millions of copies it sold, but it's one of his better selling books. But there's a 10th anniversary edition of it, okay? And now we're closing in on 25 years, but I remember him talking about that 10th anniversary edition. He went back and read what he had written and realized how many things he would have changed after just 10 years. And they're revising it now for 25 years, which is you should be able to see how you've grown. You should be able to see how God has protected you. But Moses is reminding them, and I'll touch on this in just a minute, but he's reminding them of things that brought them to this place. Why is it, or how easy is it? Maybe why is it so easy to forget where we've been and what we've been through and what's happened?
I think sometimes we want to forget. We don't want to remember the things we've been through. A lot of the things that get us to where we are today are not easy things. I mean, even for me to get here, I had to go through some difficult trials in my life and difficult
You mean
circumstances.
like this morning, or
this morning I woke up, I fell out of bed, hit my head, and I still made it. But
did you get just the look in your eyeball?
That's a story for another time. But looking back and seeing, even though like I went through like some difficult things, but those things ultimately brought me to where I am today, and I could be more happy about that. And that's the thing is, but I still don't like to look back at those things. Sometimes I look back at things that happened in the past, like I get frustrated again, or I get upset, like, why did I have to go through that? There's the benefit of being able to look back and see how God worked through things. But if I could go through it or not go through it, I would probably choose not to go through some things that are difficult. So sometimes it's just not easy to look back because it brings up bad memories or a past hurt. Yeah, so that can be difficult.
Yeah, it's easy just to forget. Life is busy and you tend to live in the moment, and without some intentionality of looking back, though, we forget perhaps the progress. And also, as you said, some of it's painful, that it also points out to us areas that we need to work on, that we still got room for improvement, that we need to make a plan to.
And our memories are faulty.
Yes, they are.
Psychologically, they tell us that your mind is naturally going to remember the positive.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it was extremely traumatic, it's only going to remember the negative. And so you're going to have this skewed view of history when you look back, and it's either going to be much worse or much better than it actually, what actually happened. And I think a regular review is a positive thing. I think sometimes we don't rehash those things, because it is painful, it is difficult, and we don't like, maybe where we've been or the decisions we made, or we think we've outgrown that and we don't want to talk about it, anymore. But I do think there's value in it. So one of the things I noticed as I read this chapter is that, to a certain degree, related to Moses and how he approached this, he rehashed every disobedience that they had committed. Every single one is like, you did this, and you did this, and you did this.
Those are easy to remember. Those are easier for us to remember.
Well, for some people it is. Some people, he rehashed every negative thing.
Like August 23rd, 1983. I remember when you did. It just seems that it's easier to recall those.
Right. And, he talks to them about this. The question when we rehash things when we're talking about things. So we'll have this conversation occasionally in here, I think, over this podcast. Why do you think he spent so much time telling them where they disobeyed? Talking about what appears to be... I mean, he always says God came through. Mm-hmm. That's the positive side of it. But as far as your behavior, it wasn't so good. Why do you think he spent so much time talking about their failures instead of their victories?
Well, a couple things to me is he wanted to remind them, if you repeat this going forward, even though you're going to be in a new place, you're going to have similar consequences. And just because you're leaving this area and ultimately getting to, quote, the promised land, there's still going to be a price to pay for disobedience. I think it was part of the reminder. I think the other big thing is we need to remember that the people that were 20 years and younger are still a part of this group, and so they've aged, and now they're in their 60s, as it were. And so a lot of these people the things that happened with their parents and grandparents may have been a very, very distant memory to them, and he wanted to bring that to the forefront and say, look, if you make the same mistakes they did, there's still a price to be paid for that.
Yeah, I think too, with him rehashing all this stuff and going through everything that bad that happened, all that they did, I think just shows God's grace to them in all that time. And God had every right to smite them.
That's right.
I think,
He did a couple of times.
And he did. I mean, God, I mean, showed that righteous anger that he has sometimes, and well deserved. And that's the thing is, but showing them you're here for a reason, you're here for a purpose. God brought you through all this, even though it not because of you, but in spite of you.
Yeah.
You know, he has brought you through this, and the promised land is like so close. You know, they're almost there, and I think. Reminding them of all you've done. I mean, I've thought about this too. Like, when I go to heaven, if Jesus had a list of every bad thing I'd ever done, it would be a very long list. I'll say that, you know, of all the wrong things I had done, and then, but it just gets crumpled up, you know. But being reminded of all that, it's like, holy cow! Like, I totally do not deserve this. I could never deserve this or earn this, and they don't deserve to get the desert to the promised land. But God has promised them, and He keeps His promises that He's going to deliver them from it. And I think. This is I think it's a powerful way to remember everything they've been through.
Yeah. So he even goes as far as to say that, and the Lord was also angry with me because of you. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not why God was angry at Moses. He was angry at Moses because Moses was angry at the people.
Yeah.
You know, even his memory slightly.
Well, yeah, the advantage is he's the one doing the speaking. He gets to frame it the way he wants to.
And technically, it is because of the people. Because if they were good, he wouldn't have been angry.
Yeah.
You know? So, in a roundabout way.
You know, I think part of what Moses is doing here is, I've been an intermediary for you for all of these years. And truthfully, he doesn't say it quite like this. If it wasn't for me, you'd all be dead, you know. But if I was honest, one of my fears of dying, particularly dying early, is that I feel like, at least at my age and where I've grown and where I'm living today, I serve as a buffer, a mediator for, not to God for my kids, even though I intercede, but there's a certain guidance, wisdom, protection that me being present offers to them. And there's going to be a day I'm going to be removed out of that situation, and I want them to have the information they need to be able to be successful and to thrive after that. So as we get down to the end here, he says, he's telling more stories. So I'll read maybe kind of the last story. He says, but the Lord told me to tell you, do not attack. So he's speaking of a different fight they were in. He says, do not attack, for I am not with you. If you go ahead on your own, you will be crushed by your enemies. This is what I told you, but you would not listen. Instead, you again rebelled against the Lord's command and arrogantly went into the hill country to fight. But the Amorites who lived there came out against you like a swarm of bees. They chased and battered you all the way from Seir to Hormah. Then you returned and wept before the Lord, but he refused to listen. I guess the question I want to ask you is, first, do you believe that God chooses not to listen sometimes? Do you believe we can put ourselves in a spot where God just says, I'm not listening anymore? And if we do, what is the danger of it?
Personally, I would say, from what I know, I think because we have Christ, because Christ, tore that veil that separated us from God, essentially, I do believe that God hears us. I believe He does listen to us. I think He knows everything, every thought we have, everything we say, every word that we say. He knows it all, and I believe He does hear us because Christ interceded for us. I don't think that was always the case, as we see here, but I believe that's the case. Even though I do say a lot of stupid things to God sometimes, I will say I think He still listens to me and puts up with me.
Yeah, in a sense, as far as God doesn't hear or can't hear us, that's obviously, I don't think that's the case. I think what it's saying here, though, I think does apply. I think we can rebel to the point that we disobey directly and consistently to the point where He just says, okay, if that's what you want, and then when the tragedy comes, it's like, well, you make those choices and decisions, now you got to live with it for a period of time. And that is a dangerous place to be in, and unfortunately, that's where we learn some of our hardest but best lessons in those seasons.
Yeah, this would be something I would struggle to clarify, because even in the Old Testament, the psalmist is right. He knows the thoughts and intents of your heart. So it's not a surprise that He would know everything.
Right.
You know, I don't think God just started knowing everything.
It wouldn't shock Him.
Because of Jesus. Yeah. You know, I don't think Jesus was the thing that's made God omniscient. But I think the challenge to believe that God does, it's much like, the way I read this is much the way I read, people say God forgets your sin. I don't think that's the way Scripture describes it. It says He chooses not to remember. There's a difference. There's if God can forget, I'm in trouble. Is He mine or not? I don't know. You know.
You're familiar.
Right, exactly.
He grew a beard.
He chooses not to remember. I think is the correct interpretation. God says, okay, I'm putting this over here, and I'm choosing not to remember. I think there are times that maybe God's silence, it feels like He's not hearing us. Maybe He's not moving at that moment. And I think maybe sometimes God's trying to get our attention. I'll give you an example. This is a little bit humorous. And but this would have been way before, cell phones would have been a fairly new thing at this point. So we still had landlines. Caller ID.
Landline? What's that?
Yeah, exactly. Caller ID was new. So this would have been like 95, 96. It was one of the first. As a matter of fact, this phone, I had bought a separate piece to go beside the phone that had caller ID. Did you ever have one of those, Jay?
No.
Yeah. And so like 11 o'clock, 11:30, I was sitting in the recliner watching TV, and a pastor friend of mine called me. And I picked up the phone. I said, I knew who it was. And what I said was, what are you doing calling me at 11:30 at night? Click. I was just playing. Like, he just hung the phone. You would have to know him. He just hung the phone up. And then I was like, oh, crap.
You just made him mad.
Yeah. So I called him back, and he didn't answer.
Oh.
I called back again. He didn't answer.
Oh.
He waited till like 3 o'clock in the morning. He called me again. He said, do you want to talk to me now? And I said,
not really.
Well, yeah. He said, you changed your mind, you know, and that was his way of saying, okay, I reached out to you, and you rejected me. Mm-hmm. Now let's make you wait for just a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so I do think there are times that God's maybe He's been trying to guide us. He's put up guardrails. He's given us instructions, and we've ignored Him, and we ended up with this consequence. And that's usually when we're going to God. That's the problem there. Oh, God, deliver me, help me, you know, fix me. And God's like, you got yourself into this. I'm going to let you suffer in it. You made your bed hard, lay in it. That's that's what it is. It's not that I think He can't hear us.
Sure. It's
that He chooses to wait, so that we learn the fullness of what we need to learn. That would be my assessment. So let's close up in prayer today. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the ability for us to remember, to review, to think back. I thank you for the times that in spite of our negativity, problems, disregard for what you asked us to do, you still delivered, helped, encouraged us, and brought us through. Thank you for that grace. Thank you for the times that you hear us. Thank you for the times it feels like you don't, but you're still there to help us and guide us in directions that we need to go. May we, with our families, may we in our own lives be intentional about looking back to remember the lessons that you wanted us to learn, so that moving forward we can be more faithful than we have been. In Jesus' name, amen.